Well, that's a tough question and a very tricky one to answer because, um, well, all my titles happen to be things that I hold dear to my heart. And the reason why I so hold all of them right at the same time is because I really can't say I would rather choose journalism, news presenting and news reporting, or writing, or either social justice, or even the smaller little things that I do, like ads and your voiceovers. There's nothing that I can't choose. Um, I can say I choose this besides the other. Journalism is a calling for me, and so is social justice and activism. So it's a very difficult and tough one to say the least. But we could say that journalism has been the most rewarding because it has led to stabilizing the others. Because had I not been a television journalist, I would not have been able to make much impact in social justice and activism because no one would have known who I am. So I could say that it has been the most rewarding because as the mainline career that I went to school for, it gave space or it opened space and headway for the others to also blossom at the same time. Okay, wow. Um, well, again, I'm gonna I'm gonna be stuck somewhere in this too, but not really because all the stories that I've covered, I could say that they were all impactful because I at the beginning of my career, I've always had the privilege of working for bigger platforms. I interned at Forbes Africa as a writer, and then I moved to CNBC Africa, which is also an international platform right at the same time. And the the uniform things or the common thing between the two platforms was the fact that they were both business platforms. And so any story I would have to cover would have to have a financial impact. There would be a story behind on why would business people in Africa have to care. The first story I covered intensely was the listeriosis outbreak. So that was one of the biggest business stories to take place in 2018. Around about the same time, one of the biggest healthcare scares that South Africa had, well, before came the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. So I covered the story intensely to an extent that I had to make sure that how did Listeria come into South Africa undetected? Secondly, what were the most hard hit places by Listeria? Um, the untold smaller stories of how the Listeria impacted the poor, the rich, and the workers that worked at those factories that had to be closed. So you had to come to the bigger money story and at the same time, the bigger human impact and interest story within the same story. So it was kind of very um what could I say? I don't even know how to describe it, but it was very close to the heart at the end of it because you had to feel with the people who had to lose their jobs, the people who had to change lifestyles because of the long-term effects. And at the same time, those people who had to adapt to having lost loved ones, which is the children that had lost their lives due to the listeria. And at the same time, the stressful effects that the executives at those bigger entities like your Tiger Brands had to go through, having to even face the class action lawsuits at the end because of all this. So it was one of them. And secondly, The VBS as well, which was South Africa's biggest business story of the year in 2018 as well, became one of the biggest impactful stories that I covered that year, because I had to go where the bank was born, which was in Venda. Imagine the language barrier. I'm Xhosa from the Eastern Cape, and at that particular time, I only knew how to say nda, which is, I didn't even know what it meant. So I had to adapt for the time being that I spent in Venda, because I had to ensure that I tell that story based on what the people who lived there, the people who saw the bank rise, who were the reason why the bank rise, and who were the now first ones to suffer their first worries because of the bank, that they boosted to grow up to be what VBS had turned to be, and now they had to be the first ones to suffer the consequences of the fall of VBS. So that was the second one. And then the third one would have been, oh wow, let's say it would have been Mama Winnie's passing. It was quite close to my heart because I had the opportunity to go to, well, yet another foreign world, because I've never stayed more than a day in the Free State. And I had to go deep in Brentford for some time to speak to people who knew Mama Winnie personally and who had personal stories to tell, as any other ordinary person who would have met yourself and me during our lifetimes, and had very profound and deep and personal stories to tell about her that South Africa and the world had not heard before. It was, for me, it was amazing to hear those stories, and to actually meet the famous woman who was not named very much in the media, who was there, who actually dismantled the rumors of Mama Winnie having killed Stompy Siepe. So it was very much close to my heart. So, well, and of course, the covering some of the continent's key moments when I did the BRICS Summit 2018, the elective conference of the ANC 2017, the UNSDR disaster risk management in October 2018, just a year before a disaster actually hit Africa. So, and having been the first time for a rural boy to go to outside of South Africa. That's when I went to Tunisia to do that. So there's quite many of them. And many had, for example, the listeriosis saw researchers from the University of Pretoria wanting to do an interview with me about covering that story, the coverage, the background of that story for their journals. I mean, there's quite a lot, but the most impactful one would be those three, except you'd say the fourth with the UNSDR. So there's quite many. I can't even choose. Oh, well, in 2020, of course, I launched the Lubabalo Mashiqana Foundation, which was a foundation I had registered in May of that year and launched in December. The reason behind me opening the Lubabalo Mashiqana Foundation was in May, you'd remember it was in the middle of the lockdown where all of us were forced to stay at home. You had plenty of time to ourselves to ponder amongst a lot of things. And amongst those things were things that we chose to bury within ourselves and things that we chose to forget. And it's a bit of a sad story. Well, it was a bit of a sad story before, but I no longer see it as a sad story, but I see it as a as a root opener for me to help others. At the age of 14, I experienced corrective rape. So I've always grown up to be a feminine boy, and unfortunately, or fortunately for me, I grew up in the deep rural areas, and I grew up from a Christian and cultural family. So that gives the same to the community of which I grew around. So I could not tell anyone about my rape story. I could not cry to anyone. The only thing I could do was to keep quiet, find a way to channel the energy, which is the anger and the emotions that had come with a 14-year-old having to survive a rape ordeal with a knife to their neck on a day which happened to be his birthday. And to have no one to talk to about that, and to have no way to turn to, and not to know exactly, in fact, what to do with that information, and with what to do with the nightmares, with everything that came with that, and seeing the person who did that to you every day and having to smile. So fortunately for me, from a very young age, um, the rape was just a highlight amongst what we what I had to endure on a daily basis. Uh, it meant that I had to work twice as hard to get to stand at the same position as the other normal children. It had to mean that I had to play twice as hard to earn my standing in the squad, which is in any sporting activity which I participated in. I had to prove twice as hard because, of course, anything or any mistake I do would be alluded to the femininity that other boys don't have. You'd have, so I always channeled that negative energy. I always used it to achieve over and above what everyone else can achieve. And it helped me. I've always come first in my studies. I've always made sure that I finished first in everything. It made me to be what I could term an overachiever, which has worked for me because by the age when my people my age had their first, I would be having my second. By the time that they would be having their first achievements, I would be looking at the third or the second. So that's what I did. I used those energies to overachieve and to become the first in everything that I did, and to get to a position of privilege where I would be able to have a say in what I do, and to be able to come out of that village, but come back in due time to educate those people, to save the other children who are going through the same thing that I was going through without having a voice, and give them a voice. So when I looked at my Facebook inboxes, my Twitter DMs, my Instagrams, I saw stories of young boys, even from villages that were not the same as mine, who had had my story being told on radio after having made it, and after having finished studies at WSU, after having gotten my first gig in at Forbes Africa and at CNBC, and they saw a person who they could open up to, because that never led me to keep quiet about the fact that this is what I went through, this is what I endured. So they looked up to me and had confidence enough to tell me those stories, and that broke me to see that the fact that I could not read all of my inbox messages meant that I missed out on a lot of people that I could have helped, or that I could have at least been there for during their time of need. So I decided to register the Lubabalo Mashiqana Foundation with immediate effect, and call on to people around the areas of which I started in Sheshegu, in Alice, where I'm from, to call to those people who were there to help me help those children and to help me help and bridge that gap between the boy and the girl child, because all this came at a time when the country was struggling hard with the epidemic of gender-based violence. And it came and laid bare other bigger problems, like the boy children having still being neglected, all the ordeals of molestation, of the rape by uncles, by pastors, by sporting coaches around in rural areas who they could not talk about. So the main aim specifically was to bridge the gap between children, to enable those children to coexist with each other as children, not as the boy child, not as the girl child. Because the reason why we're in this is because, well, men are killing men, men are killing women, men are raping women. It's all about men. The reason behind is because we have been advocating for the agenda to free the girl child, and we left that boy child neglected and causing a greater problem, because we have molded that girl child and taught them survival, leaving those boy children to become hooligans and to be neglected and take anything that they can see as right, and ending up to come at a stage where that girl child has graduated and had their first boyfriend in their first apartment to get killed at that very same by that very same boy child that was neglected. So the bridging of the gap between children and teaching them coexistence was at the core of the foundation. And after that, it was anything and everything that is a human rights violation, taking information on human rights and teaching rural and township-based communities, from children in schools, from nurses in clinics, from churches, from traditional leadership officers, to equip everyone with knowledge. Because for South Africa to come to a stand where we were able to beat teenage pregnancy, there was Love Life, who took educational programs to townships, to rural areas. For South Africa to come to a point where the stigma and discrimination behind HIV and AIDS was minimized and people could openly be HIV positive and be living with AIDS. Soul City came to township areas, to rural areas, to educate people about condoms, about sex, about HIV, normalizing to speak about the forbidden topics. That's what helped us to be progressively where we are, even on many things. So it was important for the Lubabalo Mashiqana Foundation to bring back such activities and such normalities, where there would be people who would be trained and they would go out and be foot soldiers in places where people are getting help, in places where people would seek for daily services from, for those people to normalize and to be equipped with the amount of knowledge that would lead them to be able to spread it amongst each other. And I'm grateful to say that in my village, as a village as it is, with old people and pupils and whatsoever, the amount of homophobia, the amount of discrimination, the amount of, I mean, things have changed drastically. The people who are advocates for people not to judge based on gender, race, sexuality are the elderly. The traditional leaders are the ones telling people not to discriminate based on the fact that a child is different. The preachers are the ones who are denormalizing the discrimination of people based on Sodom and Gomorrah. They are the ones who are decrypting the Bible properly for people to understand that the Bible is not a tool for oppression, but it is something that it is a manual for one's religion and beliefs, and nothing over and above that. You can be believing that, okay, you are a Christian, you're an atheist, you are whatever you are, but as long as you are practicing your belief and no one is hindering you from that, you as well do not have a right to be using your religion or your belief or your culture to oppress the other. And if you do so, you are committing a criminal offense. That is amongst the core values of the foundation, to advocate for change, which is the slogan of the Lubabalo Mashiqana Foundation. We are advocating for change. We are using whatever at our disposal to advocate and to inform and to ensure that we will bring the information to as much people as we can through voluntary educational programs that we partner with Chapter 9 institutions, NGOs, organizations that are like your social development departments, your global funds, your Commission for Gender Equality, organizations that are already playing a huge role in the activism space in different areas, from GBV, from human rights, from anything that you can deem that brings back the dignity of a human being, specifically in those deserted township and rural areas. Well, in brief, Amahle Communications, I opened it when I quit my last job as a PR manager. So after leaving active journalism, which is I left CNBC after the elections in 2019, and then I freelanced for some time for Inspire Media, which used to be doing stories, producing stories, excuse me, and interviews for China Global Television Network, which is CGTN, and Africa News. So when I left that, I went into PR. And well, I realized in PR that, okay, this is exciting. It's something that I could do on my own. It is something that could be, because I've always dreamt of having a PR business. So I was like, okay, it is really something that I can open a business on. Then why can't I not give it a try? Because I've worked in I've worked in 3 different PR companies in different portfolios, and I've seen what it takes to actually run my own PR. And I've seen a lot of people during my time as a journalist who had their smaller PR companies and they were servicing bigger companies. And I'm like, okay, cool. I know a lot of people who are at the JSE. I know a lot of people who are in business. So why not give it a try? I gave it a try, and the first campaign I ran was the hashtag hands off LCBOs, which is the low cost benefit options, when there's a fight in the healthcare sector for the retainment of the low cost benefit options, your medical insurances. And I successfully ran that campaign single-handedly, being the PR person for that. And my company used to do that PR, and boom, I ended up being the head of communications for the association that came out of that, which was the healthcare stakeholder. Continued to provide social media services, your graphics, your other PR services. And that's when I was like, okay, cool. After this, there's nothing else that I'm doing except for running Amahle Communications. Fast forward, Amahle Communications has groomed about, I think, 2 generations of interns in 2020, 2021. It employs quite a number of people, though not formally, but on a freelance basis. Whenever there's work, the work is divided between myself and those people who are the freelancers which I use For example, I would not have time to be writing the press release and doing the graphic elements myself as well. So instead, I would just get the services of a person like yourself, for example, to be the graphics person for this um, particular project. For example, we've done Pandemic Shield with Generic. We've done quite a number of, we've done RH Bupilo when it listed in the Rwanda Stock Exchange, a number of their milestones. We have gone through those with them. And RH Bupilo is a listed company in the JSE, and it has been now listed in the Rwanda Stock Exchange. And Pandemic Shield was a baby of Generic and FFG. So you can imagine it happened so fast that, okay, the spirit of the go-getter that channeled the energies of the bad things that happened to me as a child into the push factor to achieve over and beyond still lives, because I could not have done that without that spirit and without that mentality that I instilled at a very young age to myself. Amateur Communications has done very well. Yeah, so for example, there's this young and upcoming company that we took from its early stages to building its brand to becoming what it is now. I mean, they have become the first young Black entrepreneurs from Free State to create an app that is helping spaza shops and smaller businesses in logistics. So Next Kev Creations was, I think, amongst the recent ones that we did. So we did, I do quite a lot in the small 12, 24 hours a day that we have. And Amateur Communications happened to be amongst the very many or few projects that I do on a daily basis. And I think if I could have more time, it could grow up to create more jobs, to aid more smaller businesses into becoming what they really want to be, into shaping them properly into the visual brand that you see in your dreams. Because I believe the core driver behind me doing the branding and the PR and the entire amateur communications is the fact that I believe that we dream in pictures. When we dream of our next project, we visualize it. And the only way for you to have it like that is to write it down and give it to a person who is creatively gifted enough to put it into the visual form of which you have described. That is what we do. We are visual creators. We take your text and put it into existence. If you are visualizing creating this, we help you into ensuring that the end product that you get will look like this. So that's Amateur Communications. It's still small, it's still very young, and it's still pushing and kicking doors.